Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Wednesdays from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about anything you don't want to hear about. Anyway, we'll talk about anything. We're here talking a little bit about what's going on in the world today. Some of the things that happen internationally, nationally, that may have an impact on you locally, or some of the things that are happening locally that may have an impact on the rest of the world, I guess, or at least the world we live in. So it's kind of an economics type based show. It's not a financial planning, so I'm not going to teach you how to get rich. So those of you that tuned in for that, you can, hear Ray Lucia later in the afternoon or something. He'll help you out. But for me, it's just talking a little bit about some of the issues that are happening in the world, some of the things that are taking place, and what that means from an economic standpoint for us here in little old Stewart. So we welcome your participation. If you want to join in, 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. If you want to call in, and Mike will take your call, and we'll get you on the air. You don't have to give us your name. Tell us, questions, opinions, comments. We welcome them. We just ask that we, keep kind of civil. Otherwise, I'll have to tweet at you later. But I'll try to keep it above board. But anyway, again, this is Treasure Coast Solutions, and generally what we're looking at is some of the issues that are happening around town, some of the things that are happening in our little community. One of the things I wanted to talk about, we are talking the city of Stewart, if you haven't seen, is looking at having another workshop on their plastics restriction. And actually, it's probably to some degree what they're looking at is a little broader than that. They're looking at some it's really a waste reduction program, trying to generally reduce waste in total, because some of it goes beyond just the basic plastics requirement. But and so I think it's something that, if you live here in the area, Martin County, Stewart, whatever, you may want to pay attention to. If you're a business owner, you may want to pay attention to it. I don't know how many of our listeners really get into it. This thing has become somewhat politicized. I just saw a big discussion of this at San Francisco. Mike, did you happen to see that? I saw that there. I guess San Francisco has put in effect some sort of a plastics ban in their, I believe, in their airports and in any of their public property, and and if. But I didn't see exactly what all of the
I don't know the details. I'm trying to pull those up now. If I can find the exact details, I'll pass those along. I'm sure it's got something to do with at least straws, and I'd be interesting about styrofoam and it's issues like that.
Yeah, and it's I just caught a little bit of it, but and so to some degree, as soon as we start getting into some of this stuff, it becomes somewhat politicized, and people start taking positions, just because of the politics behind it and who's supporting what or whatever. But and there is, of course, anytime that you're talking about a government taking away or restricting your rights, whether it's the right to use a plastic straw or the right to recycle, in any case, you are starting to, people get upset about that. People feel differently about government intervention into their lives. But
it looks like they've banned the use of plastic water bottles at the airport.
Yeah, plastic water bottles at the airport. So you can't. That was where they went, and then they are. I think, if I remember right, they are providing some. They're providing water filling stations so that you can go in and fill up your non-plastic water bottle, I guess.
Yeah, you can drink directly from a water fountain. You can bring your own reusable bottle, or you could buy approved glass or aluminum water bottles.
And then they're talking about, but still there's, and I've heard one of the issues, and this is the problem we get into this, is when you're talking about a location or an area just like small, some of the nutritional people are saying that they're worried about it because at the airport, if you don't have a bottle, if you don't have a refillable thing that you've got, I'm sure you could buy one. It's probably relatively expensive, but you can easily go to the vending machine and get out a soda, which is in a plastic bottle that they don't restrict.
Right.
And so, which is probably worse because that plastic bottle doesn't probably break up as easily as and it doesn't get recycled either. So, and then of course you're switching from water to calories and sugar and things like that, which are of course not good for your health. So, so it's kind of there's always some issues in this, but I want to mention what's happening, and again, trying to stay a little bit with the economics of this of this type of thing versus the political stuff of it, and just to kind of indicate what some of the problems or issues are. With the city of Stewart, they're looking at initially they're looking at a two-pronged program, and I want to mention that I think that one of the problems that we've got is that a lot of people just don't understand necessarily what the problem is and how serious it is. There are some that are maybe out there. There are some that follow the cause. Like Surfriders Foundation. They're all about the ocean and about trying to preserve the environment and the especially the sea environment and the fish and some of the life there. And so they've been on top of some of these issues. We've seen some of it published nationally about the level of plastics that are getting into the water, and what they're talking about there is from a health standpoint, they're going to ultimately end up in us because some of these plastics they don't technically ever go away. They may you might not be able to see them, but they turn into little plastic balls type things, little microplastics, yes, and they're so small you can't see them, but they get eaten up by the smaller fish, and then those smaller fish are eaten up by the bigger fish, and then those bigger fish are eaten up by us or whatever. And so what happens is that over a period of time, even though they're small amounts, they just keep constantly, if your food constantly includes that, even in small amounts, it's eventually going to build up because there's nothing that can happen to it. And so it has polluted the reefs, even to the point that you just can't get rid of it, and it's in everything. And so it's starting to cause a serious problem in our environment with our food and with our health. So it is a big problem, and it's made worse by the fact that and here's where I have a problem, is that people are focusing a little bit on single-use plastics, like these plastic water bottles and like plastic straws, those kind of things. And that seems nice, but because they're thinking that, well, we can recycle. Let's get people away from single-use plastics and let's get them into recyclable plastics. Well, the issue with that is that, and this is where it's kind of from an economic standpoint, we can't produce recyclable product in the U.S. that is clean enough to use in the U.S. So based on some information I've seen from the recycling industry, you have to have about 98% pure recycled material in the U.S. for it to be turned into plastics in the U.S. And if you think about it, that makes sense. First of all, you just can't do that if it's not clean. If it's got a lot of stuff that can't be recycled, then you've got to cull that out a little bit to be able to produce recycled material with a product that's not clean enough to do that. So you need kind of what they call clean plastics that have been narrowed down to those that are specifically recyclable. And a lot of stuff that we throw into the recycle bin and feel real good about is not all recyclable, even though the base amount might be recyclable. So say for example, we throw our plastic water bottles in there, think that we recycle. Well, that may not be the case. Those bottles may not be recyclable. Some may be, depends on what ones you buy, but some may not be. So now you're contaminating the stuff that is with the stuff that's not. And then you've got some other issues with recyclables, and so like I say, most of the material to be usable in the U.S. has to be culled out. It has to be cleaned up further, and frankly, some of that cleaning is by hand. It's not by machines because it's not easy. Some of it has to physically be separated, and our labor costs are so high in the U.S. that it doesn't make sense to do that. We're paying people, $10, $11, $12, an hour. And it's going, it's going higher than that. It's going $15 and $16 an hour, for people or whatever. Whereas in China or India or Pakistan or some of the places there, they're paying 30 cents an hour or 25 cents an hour. So it makes sense, and that's actually what was happening. Many people don't realize it, but we had the recycling industry. The professional recyclers, the recycling industry, who are really kind of, pro-environment. They're trying to take these materials, these plastics, and turn them into material that can be used and recycled again. And so that's what they do. But they have to make a living at that. They're not subsidized. They're not, they have to make a living at it. So they were paying for your recycled materials. That's why, remember, you used to have those big bins that you go dump all your newspapers in. We don't have those anymore because generally it's hard to recycle newspaper nowadays because there's just not a market for it. There became so much recycled material that and so much paper that the industry couldn't use it all. And so they were throwing it away anyway. So they stopped buying it because it didn't make sense to buy it if you can't resell it at even at the pennies that you were paying for it. So that's kind of what the issue is with the plastics industry. So what was happening in the plastics industry is they're basically paying the dumps for this product. And then that product is being shipped on barges out to sea, to China and India, were the big buyers of our garbage. And they had processes there to clean it up. And then they could turn it into plastics there. Plus, let's face it, those countries don't necessarily have the restrictions on how contaminated that plastic could be. Here in the States, we have, and rightfully so, quite a few restrictions on what can go into that plastic and what it can contain, even by accident. So so we have a much higher standard of healthcare requirement and production requirement. Just like we have that same thing in the food industry and in the medicine industry and all kinds of things like that. So some of these other countries could turn this plastic that was somewhat contaminated into something that was usable. And they did that partly because they had low-cost labor and partly because they don't have the same standards there, the same requirements. And, of course, any of those kind of government standards increase cost generally. And so, so they could be more competitive. Well, they have enough now. China and India both have stopped buying. And the China thing has nothing to do. If you're going to go, oh, it has to do with the tariffs. It has nothing to do with the tariffs. China had already stopped buying, I think, almost a year ago, and it had nothing to do with tariffs or anything else. It had to do with the fact that they are producing enough garbage themselves and enough plastic themselves that they don't need any more. They're already fueling their own industries there, so they don't need to buy plastics. They have free plastics, so to speak. So that's why they stopped. And India is the same thing. They just don't need it, and they have no use for it anymore. So what was happening is that it was being shipped back, and then it was being brought back to the U.S. and dumped. And so it's going into our landfills anyway. So some of the things that we thought we were recycling, a large portion of it is coming back and being dumped. Now the U.S. recycling companies are trying to find a way to see if they can clean it, and may be able to clean some of it, but most of it they're not able to do that because it's just too much of a mess with, and you can only get rid of some of this stuff by burning it, which can create toxins in the air. And again, by recycling, there's not even like we said, even some of the plastics bottles that break up and the things that break up, they form these microplastics, and they cause a lot of issues with health. So we've got an issue. We got a real issue because we're generating a tremendous amount of plastic, and some of which we think as consumers that's being recycled, and it's not ending up being recycled. It's ending up in a dump. Now, along the same line, again, once it gets out of the U.S., it's not under U.S. control anymore. So, some of this stuff, frankly, gets dumped in the ocean. If there's no place to put it, if they're paying landfill charges or whatever, some of these places are just going to dump it. And it's going to get out there. And some of these countries don't even bother to worry about it. They're still, some of the third world countries still are not at that level. They're starting to produce some of this trash, but they're not at the point that they're really trying to prevent the damage that trash could do on the environment. And so many of that is getting dumped in the ocean, whether it's coming sometimes off of cruise ships, sometimes off of off of the land, people dumping it off the coast, things like that, where they're just trying to get rid of their waste as easily as they can, and they think the easiest way to do that is the ocean because it's huge, and in fact it works for them because it ends up getting swept out to sea, and ends up. One of the things I didn't realize is it's interesting is that we have a huge plastic cesspool, garbage dump out in the ocean because there are basically whirlpools out in the ocean, and I think they said there were 5 or 6 of them, but one of them's out in the Pacific, and this trash kind of gets sucked to that, and then gets caught up in that, and so there's tremendous amounts of plastics and garbage in that location. In fact, there was an individual, a young guy that was had come up with an idea, spent to try to clean that. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked so far. They've spent quite a few millions of dollars trying to make it happen through grants and other things, but it's difficult. Once that plastic gets in the water, it's very difficult to get it out. So that's where we're at. We have this problem. We have to solve the problem. And frankly, the problem isn't going to get solved because it's a worldwide problem. It's not going to get solved unless we find an economic solution to that makes sense for people to get rid of their trash. Right now, we don't have that because there is no place. There's no buyer of our trash right now, and so and the consumer doesn't appear to voluntarily be willing to do that, to reduce that trash. So what's happening is, we've got municipalities trying to legislate some of this, which, on paper sounds nice, but you're talking about legislating something that, first of all, you walk across the street and it's not legislated. So it's pretty hard to stop that. It's, for example, here in Stewart, one of the things that the commission is struggling with is, what do you do about people that come into town with this stuff? If you are you going to have the plastics police? We're going to take officers off patrol to start looking for people dumping plastics in the trash can. I don't think that's probably going to happen. I don't think the citizens really want to be unprotected. They probably don't want to hire additional police to do that because that will raise their taxes. So, you start looking at, well, how do you stop that? And again, part of that, I think, is educating people and letting them know what the problem is. Until people understand and know what the problem is, they're not going to voluntarily change their habits, especially if it costs them more money. Um, why would they spend an extra $2 or whatever it costs for a cloth bag when they can just, go to Publix and get as many plastic bags as they want for free? Frankly, how many of them would want to bring those back later to Publix and recycle them? Who's going to mess with it? Because they just don't think about it. And that's not even hard because you're going to Publix all the time if you shop at Publix. So, and it's the same thing with some of the other places. It's interesting, and I always talk about the kind of the economic side effect of some of this stuff, because there is some always costs behind this stuff. One of the things that people were pointing out is that some of these things like plastic bags, let's take the Publix plastic bags. It's interesting because they were saying that if you stopped, let's say Publix stopped issuing plastic bags, and didn't issue plastic bags, that the initial thought was that's going to be a real positive. But somebody pointed out, and this is just things you don't think about, but the market will think about it, because when you do have a free market, in other words, a very large group of users and a very large group of providers, in this case, you're going to get people going to whatever makes sense for them financially. They're going to do whatever's, as a whole, what makes sense financially. So what somebody pointed out with plastic bags is that a lot of these Publix bags do get reused. They get reused for trash bags. And so they end up in somebody's individual trash being used as a trash bag at some point. Now, again, that's going into the dump, but it's got a second use. It's also being used again. And what they were saying is if those weren't being used for that purpose, then most likely the consumer is going to use, instead of, just letting it fall in their trash can and getting their trash cans all dirty and having to replace their trash can all the time, which would be expensive, which is plastic, by the way, and something's got to be done with that. They're going to use a plastic bag, these plastic trash bags. Well, most of these plastic trash bags are more difficult to get rid of than the Publix bags. So, you may be creating a heavier plastics use that can't be disposed of. And like I said, even if it was recyclable, we can't recycle in most cases right now. So it's interesting, some of the side effects, and that's what is being talked about, in Stewart. But like I said, in the city of Stewart, San Francisco is an example of, now they're focused on these water bottles. The city of Stewart has indicated that what they want to do is divide this ordinance, because they've created basically they're proposing creating a new section of the law, which would deal with environment, and which would be an environmental aspect of it. It's not just plastics or waste. It was actually kind of a broader environmental type portion of the code, where the commission can pass regulations that are environmentally necessary. But what they're talking about is dividing that further right now into two, an A and a B. And 1A would be what happens on city-owned property: Memorial Park, Flagler Park, City Hall, all of those properties. What happens on those properties? And then the part B is what private enterprise would be restricted on its use. And of course, the section B is the area that the city has the least flexibility on, because constitutionally there are certain things you can't do, probably. But in fact, it's the city is faced with one of the things the city can't do is talk about whatever the product is called. The trade name is styrofoam, but it's polyurethane or whatever it is, whatever that product is. But like I say, the brand name styrofoam, because the state of Florida passed a law that prohibits. Well, it doesn't prohibit a municipality from restricting or putting a ban on styrofoam to private business. But if they do that, and they lose in court, which there's already precedent, so that's why the state did this. They don't want a bunch of municipalities going back and retrying these cases, spending a lot of taxpayer dollars when the case had already been tried and lost. So basically what it says is that if you go and you put a ban like that on, then you're responsible for all of your legal fees. And of course, if you lose, you're going to be responsible for their legal fees on all of these, on any kind of lawsuit that subsequently is generated. So that's kind of something that puts a little damper on the city's ability to eliminate styrofoam, which, interestingly enough, is probably one of the easier things to eliminate, because there are a lot more alternatives to its use than just styrofoam. So anyway, so that's so that there's already restrictions there. But so we have A and B. A is the city, B is the private individual, the private companies and that kind of thing. And so initially that looks like that ban would be strictly straws. But there again, there are a whole myriad of exceptions to this rule, is what the city is looking at. Because, for example, you've got Wawa's, who was present at the last meeting, and that individual who was there is a franchise owner. It is not Wawa's. He paid money to buy the franchise, but he has to run it according to the rules of Wawa. He has to use their product. He has to stay within their restrictions. So and Wawa's has, I think he said 700 or 800 stores nationwide. So they're not going to generally do something for 2 stores unless it makes sense for 700 or 800. Now, he indicated that Wawa's has been looking at this thing with plastic straws and how to handle that. But they're going to, it at a Wawa's type thing, it takes about 3 years for something to move through the process there, because of the testing that's required and the uses that they have to do and things like that. And then they'll put it into a market to try it out and all those kind of things. So it can take 3 years before they get a product that they will accept in the Wawa's chain. So, so then the city was looking at exempting them because, there's nothing they can do about it. But then you've got some of these other places where the law relative to recycling pretty much says anything that the city of Stewart doesn't get a tipping fee for, which means they don't get a credit for providing it. So recycled material, they're not charged, the city's charged for their waste, for their dump fees basically. They get a offset against that if they provide things that are recyclable, so they're not going into the dump. But some of those things that they don't get a fee for or even the ones that they do are still not necessarily good or bad for the environment. For example, they can recycle Solo cups, which are those things that after every event you see all over the ground. Yes, those are recyclable. Do people recycle them? No. So there's a difference between them being recyclable and them being recycled. That's a trash situation and should be handled, but it's pretty hard. So anyway, there's all of these things like, so what do you do with Wawa's? What do you do with the small business owner that's got it's got a year's supply of this stuff there and has got to get rid of it, or doesn't have an alternative? What if they don't have an alternative for for whatever you're talking about. They're exempting hospitals, nursing homes, and assisted living facilities because they have to have those bendable straws and plastic containers because of health issues and because of, the ability of somebody not be able to bend or drink or whatever. So, and the fact that they have to throw so much stuff away, they can't reuse certain things. So there's health issues. If you go to some of those things, let's say you go to metal straws or you go to other types of materials, well, then there's going to be health department issues relative to how you clean those. It's not good enough to just, run some water over them, give them to the next person. You've got sterilizing that's got to be done. There's all those kind of things. We've had experiences in the past with the lack of sterilization when we had, the Kimberly Bergalis situation and the dental problem, although that turned out to be more self-inflicted. I mean, not by Kimberly, but by the dentist. But it was more of a. But still, that's where we got into all this thing because dental equipment wasn't being sterilized in the day, and so we didn't know how much of that could be transmitted by unsterilized equipment. It's going to be the same issue here. We've got a Hep A problem in Martin County. I heard some statistics that the Hep A bacteria can stay on hard surfaces for up to 30 days. So now how long and what's going to happen if you don't properly sterilize some of these materials that you're using? What's going to happen? Are we going to have health issues and things like that? We have potential measles outbreak in the United States. What's going to happen there? So, I mean, there's just all of these things that come into play. The punishment for this is not just a fine, but the other punishment for it is that you can't get a permit in the city of Stewart for a year. Well, what if you're the Christmas parade, for example, VNA? They're going to be responsible then for all the trash because the person that pulls the permit is going to be responsible for the trash. So you got VNA, they're going to be responsible for all that trash that comes as a result of the Christmas parade. And so so naturally they violate it. So what's going to happen? Well, they can't pull a permit. And potentially they won't be able to pull a permit for a year. So hopefully the next Christmas parade comes up a day after a year from the last one. But bottom line is what can they do? I mean, they try, but what can they do? So you can exempt them out. But then if you exempt them out, what about the Arts Council? Well, the Arts Council, they generally screen off and control their facility. They have it. They're at Memorial Park, which is city-owned property, so that's going to be a bigger ban. I mentioned the plastic straws for the private companies, but for the city property and city-owned property, it's a much broader ban on virtually all plastics or a lot of different plastics, not including plastic water bottles and straws and styrofoam and a number of other things that would be banned on city property. But again, what is the city supposed? What is the Arts Council supposed to do? How do they control that? They can inform their vendors. They can tell their vendors what needs to be done, but they have people coming in from all over. So they're going to have to ban. So if somebody's coming in with water in a glass, in a plastic cup, they're not going to be able to bring that in. And even inside there, what if somebody has brought something with them? They're going to have to check bags for plastic, for empty plastic bottles. What if somebody's reusing a plastic water bottle? Or what if somebody's got a plastic straw in it? The kids have got a juice box. Are you going to, there's all of those kind of things. So the Arts Council then is got to find a way to either restrict those people from even getting in. And then again, I guess, what if they drop stuff outside before they come in? Are they going to be responsible for that? Probably not. But once they get in, you've got to make sure that they can't have any plastic that could get thrown away, or the Arts Council is going to have to hire some people to go in afterwards and sort through all the trash to make sure that none of their trash includes single-use plastics. So you can see this thing gets really, really complicated. And now you can start making exceptions, and they started talking about that. So they're going to accept. They said that they would make exceptions, although right now the city commission voted that they want to approve every single exception. So there wouldn't be, what they're proposing now is that you could apply for an exception. There's a couple things that would be exempt initially, but you can apply for an exemption, but you have to apply to the city commission, and it has to be handled on a case-by-case basis. So in other words, it won't be a list of things, because they talked about, for example, are you going to restrict a drive-through? What about a drive-through? Are you going to restrict takeout, and that type of thing? So they said, well, let's make an exemption for that, but they're not going to make it a blanket exemption for that. So you would have to. So if you're McDonald's, you would have to apply because you're a franchise. So you would get the Wawa's exception, or you might, because you have a takeout window, you might get the takeout window exception. Or the other thing that was discussed is, well, it may only apply to certain types of products, milkshakes and smoothies, because they're too thick to eat with a paper straw. So now you could get a product exemption. So if you make a shake, you may be able to, you can use plastic straws on your shakes. Or if you use smoothies, well, then what about, what kind of smoothies? Does it have to be thick smoothies? What if they're not thick smoothies? Well, where does a smoothie become a juice? And so now are we exempting juices? So, then what's the definition of a smoothie? So, there's a lot of things. In fact, they spent about 15 minutes on the discussion of the difference between bring and dispense. And again, it just shows how complicated this is. That's why people have to buy in and want to do this, because it's going to be very difficult, I think, to regulate this. And people need to be educated to what the problem is. We need to see some voluntary compliance. As I've always said in the past, I'm one that I don't like to bring a problem without a solution. And if I'm against government regulation as a solution, then I'd like to see a private sector problem answer. In my opinion, I think what we should have is because it's exactly what they're for, is an environmental co-op. We create a co-op among the citizens, among the participants, the people that have an interest in it, like Surf Riders Foundation and others, the kids in the schools, and others, that what you would join the co-op. You pay $100 a year to be a member. That gets you a membership card, which allows you then to get some information by email, hopefully not by paper, but you would get some information about what the problem is, what's being done to help it, what we can do to prevent it, and what kind of choices we might have. Businesses would participate. They would provide product that can be used, that would encourage people to use it, like cloth bags and things like that. They could provide information on to them, to the consumer, on what the consumer can do. The consumer would, and then the co-op would provide information to the businesses, what's out there as alternatives, what they're seeing being used. The businesses could share information internally as to what they can do. And then you would also have, if you're a member and you go to a place and you've forgotten your cloth bag, which happens to me all the time. I'm getting better at Fresh Market or Publix, but it happens to me more and more when I go to, a department store. You go to a Dillard's or a Macy's or something, and or even one of the shops downtown, and I forgot to bring a cloth bag because I didn't think I was buying anything. I just was going someplace. And so, so maybe there, if you're a member of the co-op, that store will provide you with a bag. Probably it'll be a promotional thing, but a little bag that you can use, and then you can bring back and get credit on your, and then the business can get a credit for that. And then, like I say, instead of fines, I would like to see, businesses that have certain products they can't comply with, that are trying, but they can't, that they would pay a mitigation fee into the co-op to be used to buy other products and offset and, help with funding research and things like that on products that can be used. And, like I said, until people get to the point that they're educated, it's going to be hard for a very small community, whether it's San Francisco or which has, millions and millions of dollars, or little old Stewart, which doesn't, to handle it. For example, the private businesses within the city limits would include Stewart Middle School and J.D. Parker. Well, how do you think that the kids get milk in the schools nowadays? No, it's not that little carton that we used to get when we were kids with the little paper straw that you drank out of. That's not it anymore. Now it is a plastic bag with a pointed plastic straw that you have to stab through the bag. See, now there's a case of two governmental organizations that aren't even educating each other, because there had to be an alternative to that. And if the school district had thought about it, they might have thought maybe we shouldn't do that. Now, most likely the milk that they're getting is probably coming subsidized from the federal government. So the federal government is probably contributing to the problem. But bottom line is, are you going to say that J.D. Parker is going to pay a fine for all these little elementary kids that are drinking milk at lunch? I doubt it. And I doubt you're going to ban it. So that's the issues that you're talking about. And a lot of it is economic issues, because all of these entities have to pay for all of this stuff. And I'm sure the school has a very tight budget and can't afford 50 cents more a milk carton or $1 more a milk carton. Now, if all of the parents went to the school and said, we would really like you to do this and we're okay with that, then I guess that's probably what would happen. But J.D. Parker, those are all subsidized. So the government has to buy in on that, because the parents aren't paying for that. In many cases, it's the government paying for it. They get federally subsidized lunches and federally subsidized breakfasts over there. Regardless of your economic class or level, you get free lunch and free breakfast. So now the federal government's involved in that. So even if the parents said voluntarily, we don't want to do that, they have to get buy-in by whoever's paying for it. In this case, it's the federal government. So those are some of the things that I think are going on out there, some of the issues that are taking place on this issue. And economically, we have to figure a way to make it worthwhile, and penalties don't do it. Just like tariffs, we have a lot of problem with tariffs. And as a free trade person, I have a lot of problems with tariffs. I think sometimes they're necessary in certain areas, but they can get out of control. And it's the same thing here. Fines and penalties may be counterproductive. They may result in using something that's worse, or it may involve going somewhere else, which hurts the economic environment. And if there's no businesses downtown and in the city of Stuart to pay taxes, to pay for their landowners' taxes, and if the value of properties go down because businesses choose not to stay here, or only high-priced businesses stay here so that the people of Stuart can't afford them, then Stuart becomes more of an entertainment city. It becomes a clematis street. And I'm not sure that we want that too. I don't think we want all of our retail shops out of business. We've got great restaurants here. I'm sure we could have tons of great restaurants here. But, now you're talking about tons of great restaurants that would have the same issues that we're having, or they would be extremely expensive, and that there would be nobody here in Stuart that would, be able to afford them. Ultimately, it would cause a problem. So it's interesting, just looking at all of this. There's a lot of practical application to this, but with many things, it's actually a free market solution, and that free market solution is education of the consumer. Once the consumer is educated as to the environmental costs that they're incurring, which it could be health costs, could be it's all kinds of different costs between all of the things that all of the things that are happening out there. It could be a number of different costs. So if we understand that, we just understand the cost to our health and understand the cost to the environment and the rivers and the oceans that we want to maintain. Yes, again, even the U.S., if we were to do all of that on our own, we can't stop China, we can't stop India, we can't stop any of these other places. But it go a long way to correcting it if we voluntarily knew why, and then as a group, we had enough people who wanted to participate. And, that I think is that grassroots effort is what it's going to take here, because economically it's going to take people who are willing to not pay more, because it's not really paying more when you consider the cost of the alternative. And that's what people have to understand. But see, people inherently will understand that once they're educated. When you start taking a program into our schools and explaining to our kids what's happening with the fish and the turtles and the sea life and their own health and how that gets into them, you'll see a change, because they will push their parents to also change, and it'll help. But right now, it's kind of it may just be something with a whole lot of exceptions, and frankly, I can't imagine that a city commission wants to deal with this every single time that there's got to be an exemption. There's a lot of businesses in Stewart. You'd think you could come up with some standard exemption so that if you meet the requirements, you'd get it automatically. The staff could approve it, rather than having to take up commission meetings every single meeting with somebody making a case. And it's not going to be easy, because they're all going to be exceptions. So, and once the first exception is made, then it'll be the commission's job and the city attorney's job to make sure that any other exemptions don't discriminate against somebody else. So if you gave somebody an exemption because they have a takeout window, when Macy's puts in a takeout window or whatever, you better not be, discriminating against them. So it's going to be difficult. It's the consistency of that is going to be very hard, especially at the commission level. It's going to take a lot of time to deal with that. I think the staff is going to have to make sure that they've vetted it well, and then there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come up at that level. So anyway, that's something to keep an eye on, because it will affect your pocketbook. One of the things that was pointed out to me is, for some of our elderly population, and we have a large portion of it in condos, that are down south, out east of town. What's going to happen with some of that, with some of those people when, it's one thing they could switch to cloth bags, but who can carry all those groceries back up to their, the good thing about the plastic bags is they're small, so you could carry them up 2 or 3 at a time. With the cloth, they're going to have to pack those bigger, because you can't have 20 of them. You could, but it'd be pretty expensive. So people are going to try to save money. They're going to all put them in one bag, and then they're going to get home, and they can get them carried out to the car, but they're going to get them home. And how do they get them upstairs or whatever? So it's going to be interesting to see there. Like I said, there's a whole lot of issues there that haven't been allowed for. But like I said, they even had the issue of bring versus dispense, and that had to do with if you're having let's say you have a family picnic at a pavilion in Flagler Park, and you don't get a permit, you just go down there and you get it. And so somebody stops and brings some wings, and somebody else brings some drinks, and so they come down there and they hand all that stuff out, and they throw it away. It's, paper plates and paper napkins and all that. And they hand it out and give it to them, and then they throw all of that styrofoam away, or all the other stuff away. Is that a violation? Well, when it was written as bring, it would not be, or it would be. But if it's dispense, it might not be, because they didn't really dispense. They just gave the food out. They didn't dispense the stuff. They used it themselves. So anyway, it's a lot of issues, a lot of things like that are coming up. So keep an eye out on that. There's going to be another workshop. Voice your opinion, get educated, read some of the material so you understand what the purpose is, and hopefully get out there and make a difference, because it's you as an individual that makes a difference in this world, not government, not somebody else. It's you that can make a difference. Just get out there and make it happen. And we'll keep letting you know about it right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.